Marcus Chen stood at the edge of the Forbidden Zone, his battle-scarred armor reflecting the crimson light of 3 dying suns. The exile mark burned into his left shoulder served as a constant reminder of his disgrace. Once he had been the pride of the Terran Defense Corps, a decorated captain who led humanity's finest against the Void Swarm. Now, he was nothing more than a wandering mercenary, cast out for refusing a direct order that would have meant civilian deaths. The rocky landscape before him stretched endlessly, jagged peaks piercing a blood-red sky. This was Draconis Prime, a world that had been quarantined for over 2 centuries. The official reports claimed it was a dead world, consumed by ancient weapons that left it uninhabitable. But Marcus had learned the truth from a dying archaeologist in a backwater cantina. The world wasn't dead, it was protected. His ship's scanners had picked up energy signatures unlike anything in the galactic database. The readings suggested massive life forms, creatures of incredible power that the galaxy had long believed extinct. Dragons. Real dragons. Not the pale imitations found on frontier worlds, but the legendary beings that once soared between stars. Marcus adjusted his plasma rifle and checked his supplies one last time. His water would last 3 days, his food perhaps 4. The atmosphere was breathable, but thick with electromagnetic interference that made long-range communication impossible. If he died here, no one would know. No one would care. The thought should have troubled him, but instead it brought a strange peace. The first sign that he wasn't alone came as he descended into a crystalline valley. Bones littered the ground, not ancient fossils but recent remains. Scorch marks on the rocks told a story of violent death. These weren't the bones of native creatures but of various species from across the galaxy. Poachers, most likely, drawn by rumors of dragon scales and other priceless materials. A low rumble echoed through the valley, followed by a sound that made his blood freeze. It was a roar, but not like any creature he had encountered in 20 years of warfare. This sound carried intelligence, rage, and something else. Grief. Marcus had heard that same note in his own voice when he held his dying squad mate on Kepler 7. The dragon appeared without warning, erupting from behind a crystal formation like a living mountain. Its scales were deep emerald, each one the size of a dinner plate, and its eyes burned with ancient intelligence. The creature was easily 200 meters long, its wings casting shadows that darkened the entire valley. This wasn't just any dragon. This was an elder, one of the legendary beings that had once ruled star systems. Marcus raised his rifle instinctively, then slowly lowered it. The weapon would be useless against such a creature, and something in those burning eyes told him that aggression would mean instant death. Instead, he stood perfectly still, meeting the dragon's gaze without flinching. In the military, he had learned to read the intentions of his enemies. This dragon wasn't looking at him like prey. It was studying him, weighing his worth. The dragon's massive head lowered until it was mere meters away. Marcus could feel the heat radiating from its nostrils, could see his reflection in those ancient eyes. When the creature spoke, its voice resonated through his bones, speaking in perfect Terran standard despite having no apparent contact with human civilization. "Another thief comes seeking treasure," the dragon rumbled. "Yet you do not flee, small warrior. Why?" Marcus found his voice after a moment of shock. Speaking to legends wasn't covered in military training. "I'm not here for treasure. I'm here because I have nowhere else to go." The dragon's eyes narrowed, studying him with renewed interest. "An exile. I can smell the shame upon you mixed with honor. A rare combination among your species." "My species has many flaws," Marcus replied honestly. "But some of us still try to do what's right even when it costs us everything." The dragon pulled back slightly, its expression unreadable. "You speak of doing what is right, yet you carry weapons designed for killing. Your armor bears the marks of many battles. What makes you different from the others who have come seeking our destruction?" Marcus looked down at his battered equipment, then back at the magnificent creature before him. "Because I've seen what happens when the strong prey on the weak. I've seen civilizations burn because someone decided their lives didn't matter. If you're protecting something here, I won't be the one to take it from you." For a long moment, the dragon said nothing. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the whisper of wind through crystal formations. Then, unexpectedly, the dragon's expression shifted to something that might have been surprise. "In 3 centuries, you are the first to speak of protection rather than plunder. Perhaps there is more to your species than I believed." The dragon lifted its great head, looking toward distant peaks. "Follow me, Marcus Chen. There is something you must see." Marcus startled at hearing his name, but the dragon was already moving, its massive form gliding across the ground with surprising grace. He hurried to follow, his boots crunching on crystal shards as they left the valley behind. Whatever lay ahead, he knew his life was about to change forever. The journey through the crystal formations took most of the day, with Marcus struggling to keep pace with the dragon's massive strides. The creature, who had introduced itself as Pyraxis the Flamebearer, moved with an elegance that defied its enormous size. As they traveled, Marcus began to notice details that military sensors had missed. The crystals weren't natural formations, but carefully cultivated gardens, their surfaces carved with intricate patterns that told stories in a language older than human civilization. "Your people see only resources to be harvested," Pyraxis rumbled as they walked. "They look at our world and calculate its worth in credits and trade goods. But every crystal here is a memory, every formation a piece of history preserved for future generations." Marcus ran his fingers along one of the carved surfaces, feeling the smooth precision of work done by claws rather than tools. "We've forgotten how to see beauty that isn't useful. It's one of our greatest failings, yet you see it now. Why?" The question hung in the air as they crested a ridge, and Marcus's breath caught in his throat. Before them lay a vast crater, but instead of devastation, it held the most magnificent sight he had ever witnessed. The crater was filled with structures that seemed grown rather than built, organic curves and spirals that rose hundreds of meters into the air. And throughout these structures, dragons soared and glided, their scales catching the light of the triple suns like living jewels. "The last sanctuary," Pyraxis said with obvious pride. "When your kind reached the stars, we knew our time of dominance was ending. So we gathered here all who remained of the great flights. We built this place as a refuge, a repository of knowledge and culture that spans millions of years." Marcus counted at least 50 dragons of various sizes and colors, from deep midnight blue to brilliant gold. Young ones, barely larger than his shuttle, played among the spires while ancient elders rested on platforms carved from single massive crystals. It was a civilization in miniature, beautiful and tragic in its isolation. "How many?" he asked quietly. 53 adults, 12 younglings," Pyraxis replied. "All that remains of the billions who once filled the galaxy with song and flame." The weight of that knowledge settled on Marcus like a heavy blanket. An entire species reduced to a handful of survivors, hiding from a galaxy that saw them only as obstacles or resources. It was a story he had seen before, played out on dozens of worlds as humanity and other species expanded across the stars. As they descended into the sanctuary, dragons turned to watch their approach. Marcus felt the weight of their attention. Ancient eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations now focused on a single human exile. He heard whispers in their musical language, words that sounded like wind chimes and distant thunder. "They wonder why I bring a human into our sacred space," Pyraxis explained. "Many have suffered at the hands of your kind. Some bear scars from human weapons. A smaller dragon, its scales a deep purple that shifted to silver at the edges, approached them. Its movements were fluid but cautious, and Marcus noticed that one of its wings had been badly damaged, leaving it unable to fly properly. "This is Astara, the Knowledge Keeper," Pyraxis said. "She leads our archive council and maintains the records of our people. She also has reason to distrust humans." Astara's voice was softer than Pyraxis's, but no less powerful. 20 years ago, human raiders attacked our outer sanctuary on Nebula 7. They killed 6 of our kind and wounded many others before we drove them off. I was among those who bore the cost of their greed." She gestured to her damaged wing with obvious pain. Marcus felt the familiar weight of his species' actions, the guilt that came with wearing human skin in a galaxy where humanity had made more enemies than friends. But he also recognized something else in Astara's voice. Not just pain, but curiosity. "I'm sorry for what my people did to you," he said simply. "I know those words can't heal your wing or bring back the dead, but they're all I have to offer." Astara tilted her great head, studying him with eyes that seemed to look straight through to his soul. "Most humans offer excuses or justifications. Few offer simple truth. Pyraxis says you are different. Perhaps he speaks truly." She led them deeper into the sanctuary, past libraries carved from living rock where dragon scholars carefully preserved ancient texts written in flame and light. They passed workshops where artisans crafted objects of incredible beauty, their claws shaping metal and crystal with precision that would shame the finest human machinery. Our people have always been creators as well as warriors, Astara explained. We built wonders that spanned star systems, composed symphonies that could be heard across light years. But the galaxy remembers us only as monsters to be slain or tamed. They entered a vast chamber where hundreds of eggs rested in carefully maintained nests. Each egg was unique, some glowing with inner light, others covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as Marcus watched. Dragon parents tended them with infinite care, maintaining the precise temperatures and atmospheric conditions needed for healthy development. Our future, Astara said with quiet pride. In another 100 years these will hatch. Perhaps by then the galaxy will have learned to see us as more than legend or threat. Marcus stared at the eggs, understanding now why the dragons had chosen to hide rather than fight. They weren't just preserving themselves but preparing for a future where their children might find acceptance. It was an act of faith that humbled him. There's something you're not telling me, Marcus said, turning to face both dragons. You didn't bring me here just to show me your sanctuary. What do you need? Paraxis and Astara exchanged a look that somehow conveyed volumes of unspoken communication. When Astara spoke again, her voice carried the weight of desperate hope. 3 days ago, our outer sensors detected a massive fleet approaching this system. Ships bearing the insignia of the Collectors Guild, the most ruthless poachers in the galaxy. They come seeking our eggs, our scales, our very lives to sell to the highest bidder. They will arrive within the week. Marcus felt his blood chill. The Collectors Guild was legendary for their brutality and efficiency. They had strip-mined entire worlds of life, caring nothing for the consequences as long as profit could be made. Against such a force, even dragons would struggle. How many ships? 47 vessels, including 3 dreadnoughts, Paraxis replied grimly. More firepower than we can resist, even with our full strength. Marcus understood now why they had brought him here, why they had shared their greatest secrets with a human exile. They needed his knowledge of human tactics and technology. But looking at the eggs and the peaceful dragons tending them, he knew that knowledge alone wouldn't be enough. The Collectors Guild didn't take prisoners or accept surrender. They came to harvest and nothing would be left alive when they finished. Marcus spent the night in the sanctuary's guest chambers, but sleep eluded him as he processed the impossible situation. 47 ships against fewer than 60 dragons, most of whom were scholars, artisans, and caretakers rather than warriors. The military part of his mind ran calculations and came up with the same answer every time. Certain death for everyone in the sanctuary. He rose before dawn and found Paraxis waiting for him on a balcony overlooking the crater. The great dragon was motionless, staring up at the stars where death was approaching with methodical precision. You're planning to evacuate, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Some of us are, Paraxis replied without looking away from the sky. The young ones, the eggs that can be safely moved, a few of the knowledge keepers to preserve our history. But most of us are too old, too large, or too stubborn to run. This place is sacred to us. It contains the accumulated wisdom and beauty of our entire civilization. And you'd rather die than abandon it, wouldn't you? Marcus thought of Earth, of the small farm where he'd grown up before joining the military. Would he die to protect it? The answer came without hesitation. Yes, but I'd also try to find another way. Paraxis finally turned to look at him, golden eyes reflecting the early morning light. What way? We are mighty, but we cannot fight an entire fleet. Our fire burns hot, but their ships carry shields and armor designed specifically to withstand dragon flame. They've done this before on other worlds. Marcus leaned against the balcony's crystal railing, his mind racing through possibilities. Military training had taught him to think in terms of assets and objectives, to find weaknesses in apparently impossible situations. The Collectors Guild was powerful, but they had one critical flaw: greed. They're coming here because they believe you can't resist them. They've planned this as a harvest operation, not a military campaign. That means they'll be focused on capture rather than destruction, at least initially. And how does that help us? Marcus pulled out his personal datapad and began sketching a rough diagram of the star system. They'll want to take the sanctuary intact if possible. Dragon eggs and living specimens are worth more than corpses. That means they'll have to land troops and heavy equipment, which gives us an opportunity. Paraxis studied the diagram with interest. You think like a warrior, not a scholar. Continue. The approach to this crater is limited. These crystal formations create natural choke points where a small force could hold off a much larger one. If we could force them to come at us through those passages, we could make them pay dearly for every meter, Pyraxis finished. But paying dearly is not the same as stopping them entirely. Eventually we would be overwhelmed, Marcus nodded grimly. That's true, but we wouldn't be trying to win a conventional victory. We'd be buying time for something else. Over the next hour, Marcus outlined his plan to an expanding group of dragons. It was audacious, possibly suicidal, and relied on precise timing and coordination between species that had little reason to trust each other. But as he spoke, he saw something kindle in their ancient eyes. Hope. The plan hinged on Marcus's knowledge of human technology and psychology. The Collectors Guild used standard military equipment, much of its systems he had worked with during his time in the Defense Corps. Their ships, their weapons, their communication protocols, all were designed according to human military doctrine, which meant they followed predictable patterns. Their command ship will hang back initially, coordinating the assault from a safe distance, Marcus explained to the assembled Council of Elders. But once they commit ground forces, the commander will want to oversee the operation personally. Guild commanders are rewarded based on the value of their harvests, so they take personal interest in high-value targets. Astara leaned forward, her damaged wing tucked carefully against her side. And if we could reach this command ship? Guild ships have a fatal flaw built into their design. They're heavily armored against external threats but vulnerable to internal sabotage. If someone could get inside and reach the reactor core, Marcus spread his hands. The explosion would take out half the fleet. Someone, Pyraxis rumbled thoughtfully. Meaning you. I'm the only one here who knows their systems well enough to navigate a guild ship. And I'm expendable. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Several dragons exchanged looks, communicating in their silent way that Marcus was beginning to recognize. Finally, an ancient dragon named Korath the Starsinger spoke for the first time. In our culture, there is no such thing as an expendable life, Korath said. His voice was like distant thunder, aged by centuries of wisdom and loss. Every being carries within them the potential for greatness, for redemption, for love. To sacrifice oneself is not expendable. It is the highest honor. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced since his exile. Then we do this together. You hold the choke points, keep their ground forces busy. I get to the command ship and make sure they can't call for reinforcements or retreat to try again later. And if you succeed? If I succeed, the remaining guild ships will be scattered and leaderless. Your people can hunt them down one by one or force them to flee the system entirely. Either way, the sanctuary survives. Pyraxis stood to his full height, spreading wings that blocked out a significant portion of the morning sky. Then we have 3 days to prepare for war. I will gather our warriors and begin fortifying the approach routes. Astara, begin the evacuation of the non-combatants and the eggs that can be safely moved. As the dragons dispersed to their tasks, Marcus found himself alone with Astara. The Knowledge Keeper studied him with an expression that might have been sympathy. You do not expect to survive this, she observed. Marcus shrugged, checking his equipment one more time. Survival was never the point. I've been looking for a way to die that mattered since they threw me out of the Corps. This seems like as good a way as any. Perhaps, Astara said quietly, but I think you might be surprised by what you're truly capable of. Pyraxis sees something in you. Something that even you haven't recognized yet. She turned to leave, then paused. The young ones we're evacuating will need stories of what happened here. Stories of the human who stood with dragons against impossible odds. Make sure it's a story worth telling. As Marcus watched her go, he realized that for the first time in years he wasn't fighting for duty or orders or even survival. He was fighting for something much more precious. The chance to be remembered not as an exile or a failure, but as someone who had chosen to stand when standing mattered most. The next 3 days passed in a blur of desperate preparation. Marcus worked alongside dragons who treated him not as an outsider, but as a fellow defender of their home. He helped position defensive barriers in the narrow passes leading to the sanctuary, using his knowledge of human tactics to predict where the guild forces would concentrate their attacks. The dragons proved to be quick learners when it came to military strategy. Their natural intelligence, combined with centuries of accumulated wisdom, allowed them to grasp complex concepts with remarkable speed. Piraxis took particular interest in human communication protocols, memorizing frequency patterns and encryption keys that Marcus provided. If we can intercept their battlefield communications, we can stay one step ahead of their movements, Marcus explained as they tested a captured guild radio transmitter. Military doctrine relies on coordination. Break that coordination, and even superior forces become vulnerable. Young dragons who had never seen combat listened intently as Marcus demonstrated human weapons and armor, learning weak points and effective attack patterns. It pained him to teach such magnificent creatures the art of killing, but the alternative was their extinction. On the second day, the evacuation began. Marcus watched as dragon families made the heartbreaking decision to send their youngest members away from the only home they had ever known. Eggs were carefully loaded into specially modified transport ships, each one representing hope for a future that might never come. Where will they go? Marcus asked Astara as another ship departed for the outer system. Hidden sanctuaries, worlds that exist only in our oldest star charts, places where they can grow to maturity and safety. Her voice carried deep sadness. But without the knowledge stored here, without the culture and traditions that make us who we are, they will be dragons in body only. The weight of what they were defending grew heavier with each passing hour. This wasn't just about lives or territory. It was about the preservation of an entire way of being. The Collectors Guild would take everything, leaving nothing but empty caves and scattered bones. On the third night, long-range sensors detected the approaching fleet. 47 ships of various sizes, led by 3 massive dreadnoughts that could level mountains with their weapons. Marcus stood with the dragon leaders on the highest tower of the sanctuary, watching distant engine trails streak across the starfield. Tomorrow, we fight for everything we hold dear, Piraxis announced to the assembled warriors, 23 adult dragons, the strongest and most experienced of their kind, prepared to face overwhelming odds. Let the galaxy remember that dragons do not yield, do not surrender, and do not bow to those who would destroy beauty for profit. A chorus of roars echoed through the crater as the dragons voiced their defiance. The sound carried power that Marcus felt in his bones, a declaration of war that reached across space to challenge the approaching enemy. Marcus spent his final evening checking and rechecking his equipment. His plan to reach the command ship relied on a combination of stealth, luck, and split-second timing. He would have only one chance, and failure meant the death of everyone he had come to care about. Astara found him in the armory as he loaded his final magazine. "I have something for you," she said, producing a small crystal pendant from one of her pouches. The crystal pulsed with inner light, casting rainbow patterns on the walls. "What is it?" "A memory stone. Our people use them to record important events, to preserve moments that should never be forgotten. This one is blank, waiting to record your final battle." She placed the pendant around his neck with surprising gentleness. "Whatever happens tomorrow, your story will survive." Marcus touched the warm crystal, feeling its weight against his chest. "Thank you. For everything. I want you to know that these past few days have been the best of my life, and they will not be the last good days you see," Astara replied with conviction. "I have faith in you, Marcus Chen. More faith than you have in yourself." Dawn came too quickly, bringing with it the distant rumble of descending ships. The Guild fleet had taken position in high orbit, close enough to deploy ground forces but far enough to retreat if the operation went badly. Standard procedure for a harvest mission. Marcus took his position in the communications center, monitoring Guild frequencies as their commanders coordinated the initial assault. The dragons waited in concealed positions throughout the crystal formations, ready to turn the beautiful landscape into a killing field. "Contact in 30 minutes, Marcus reported to Piraxis over their improvised communication network. 3 landing sites just as we predicted. Heavy armor and artillery in the first wave, followed by capture teams. Understood. All units are in position." Piraxis's voice carried grim satisfaction. "Let them come and learn the price of disturbing a dragon's rest." The first shuttles appeared as dark specks against the crimson sky, growing larger as they descended toward the sanctuary. Marcus counted 47 assault craft in the initial wave, each one carrying enough firepower to level a city block. The Collectors Guild wasn't taking any chances. As the lead shuttles touched down in the predetermined landing zones, Guild Marines poured out in disciplined formations. They wore powered armor designed to withstand dragon flame and carried weapons that could punch through scaled hide. Professional soldiers, well-equipped and experienced in fighting exotic species. They advanced through the crystal passages with textbook precision, clearing each formation before moving to the next. Their confidence was evident in their casual communications, jokes, and betting pools transmitted over open frequencies. To them, this was just another job. The dragons let them penetrate deep into the formations before springing their trap. The first attack came without warning, Pyraxis erupting from beneath a crystal outcropping to engulf an entire squad in superheated flame. Even through their armor, the Marines died screaming. Chaos erupted across the battlefield as dragons attacked from concealed positions, using their intimate knowledge of the terrain to devastating effect. Crystal formations that had seemed like obstacles became firing positions, and passages that appeared safe became killing zones. Marcus monitored the guild communications as their neat tactical formations dissolved into desperate attempts to survive. Squad leaders called for artillery support, medics screamed for evacuation, and officers demanded reinforcements from the fleet above. Now, Marcus whispered to himself as he saw the command ship beginning its descent. The guild commander was coming down to take personal control of the operation. Just as predicted, it was time for the most dangerous part of the plan. Marcus activated his stealth field and slipped out of the sanctuary through a hidden exit. Behind him, the battle raged with increasing fury as more guild forces poured into the crystal maze, only to meet dragon claws and flame at every turn. The sound of war echoed through the formations, the crack of energy weapons, the roar of dragons, and the screams of dying soldiers. But Marcus's attention was fixed on the massive shape descending from the sky, the command ship that held the key to victory or defeat for both sides. The command ship settled onto a reinforced landing platform 3 kilometers from the main battle, its massive bulk bristling with defensive turrets and sensor arrays. Marcus approached through the maze of crystal formations, his stealth field bending light around him as he moved from shadow to shadow. Guild security was predictably thorough, but followed standard protocols that Marcus knew by heart. Patrol patterns, sensor sweeps, checkpoint rotations, all designed to counter conventional threats. Not a single infiltrator with intimate knowledge of their procedures. The memory crystal around his neck pulsed gently, recording everything as he slipped past the outer perimeter. Guard posts that should have been impregnable became navigable, obstacles when you knew exactly when the sensors would cycle and where the blind spots were located. Marcus paused at the base of the command ship's boarding ramp, listening to the tactical chatter from the battlefield. The dragons were holding their positions magnificently, but the cost was becoming apparent. Korath the Starsinger was wounded, his ancient voice tight with pain as he coordinated the eastern defense. 2 young dragons had already fallen to concentrated artillery fire. Commander Vex to all units, crackled over the guild frequency. Acceptable losses so far. Continue the advance and remember, live specimens are worth 10 times more than corpses. I want those adult dragons taken intact. Marcus recognized the voice from intelligence briefings during his military service. Vex was a legend among the Collectors Guild, responsible for the extinction of at least 6 sentient species. He was also notoriously hands-on in his approach to valuable operations. The boarding ramp lowered with a mechanical whir, and Marcus slipped inside behind a group of returning scouts. The ship's interior was exactly what he expected. Sterile corridors lined with cargo holds designed to contain captured specimens. Some of the holds were already occupied with creatures from previous raids, their mournful cries echoing through the ventilation system. Marcus made his way deeper into the ship, following memorized schematics toward the reactor core. The corridors were busy with technicians and officers monitoring the battle, analyzing dragon combat patterns and updating capture strategies in real time. Sir, the eastern approach is meeting heavier resistance than anticipated, reported a communications officer, as Marcus passed an open briefing room. The dragons seem to know exactly where to hit our formations. Impossible, Commander Vex replied from his position at the tactical display. Our intelligence indicates they're primarily scholars and artisans. They shouldn't have this level of tactical sophistication. Marcus allowed himself a grim smile as he continued toward the reactor core. Human arrogance was proving as predictable as their technology. The reactor section was heavily guarded, but the guards were watching for external threats, not infiltrators who had already penetrated the ship's defenses. Marcus waited for a shift change, then slipped past the checkpoint during the brief confusion of personnel rotation. The reactor core itself was a thing of beauty and terror, a contained star that powered the massive dreadnought. Modifying it to overload would require precise work on the containment field generators, but the result would be an explosion visible from orbit. As Marcus began connecting his improvised detonation device to the reactor's control systems, the ship shuddered under the impact of something massive. Through the reactor chamber's viewports, he could see Paraxis engaged in aerial combat with Guild fighter craft, his emerald scales gleaming as he twisted through missile contrails and energy blasts. The great dragon was magnificent in battle, moving with impossible grace for something so large. But even as Marcus watched, a lucky shot from a Guild interceptor scored along Paraxis's left wing, sending him spiraling toward the ground. Marcus's hands moved faster on the detonation controls, knowing that time was running out for everyone. The device was almost ready when footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Someone was coming. Commander Vex entered the reactor chamber with a squad of elite guards, his weathered face showing more curiosity than concern. Well, a human saboteur. I have to admit I didn't see this coming. Marcus slowly raised his hands, the detonation device just barely hidden behind his body. Commander Vex, your reputation precedes you. As does yours, Captain Marcus Chen. Yes, I know who you are. Court-martialed for refusing orders, exiled for putting civilian lives above military objectives, a bleeding-heart idealist who threw away a promising career. Something like that. Vex stepped closer, studying Marcus with the calculating gaze of a predator. What I don't understand is why you're here. These dragons are nothing to you. Why risk your life for creatures you've known for less than a week? Marcus thought of Paraxis's dignity, Astara's wisdom, the eggs waiting in hidden sanctuaries for a chance at life. Because someone has to draw the line somewhere. Because if we don't protect the beautiful things in this galaxy, what's the point of all our expansion and conquest? Touching. Naive, but touching. Vex gestured to his guards. Kill him. The explosion that followed wasn't from Marcus's detonation device, but from somewhere else in the ship. The lights flickered, emergency klaxons began wailing, and the artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. Everyone in the reactor chamber was thrown against the walls as the ship listed to one side. Report, Vex shouted into his communicator. Sir, we're under attack by multiple dragons. They've somehow coordinated a simultaneous assault on all 3 command ships. The Harvester is already down and we're losing containment on multiple decks. Marcus grinned as understanding dawned. The dragons hadn't been content to simply hold their defensive positions. While he had infiltrated this ship, they had launched their own desperate assault on the entire command structure. It was the kind of audacious strategy that only worked when you had nothing left to lose. Taking advantage of the confusion, Marcus lunged for his detonation device. Vex's guards opened fire, their energy bolts searing through the air where he had been standing. One caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the reactor control console. Secure that device, Vex ordered, but it was too late. Marcus's finger found the activation switch as another explosion rocked the ship. The detonation timer began its final countdown, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. 30 seconds, Marcus gasped, blood flowing from his wounded shoulder. You might want to start evacuating. Vex's face went pale as he realized what was about to happen. You're insane. You'll kill everyone on this ship. That was always the plan. The commander and his guards fled the reactor chamber, their shouts echoing down the corridors as they tried to reach escape pods before the inevitable explosion. Marcus remained by the reactor, watching the countdown timer tick toward 0. Through the chamber's viewports, he could see dragons soaring through smoke and flame, their battle cries audible even through the ship's hull. Pyraxis was back in the air, his damaged wing not slowing him down as he led the final assault on the remaining Guild vessels. The memory crystal around Marcus's neck pulsed brighter as the countdown reached its final moments. Whatever happened next, the story would survive. The galaxy would know that dragons and humans could stand together against those who sought to destroy beauty for profit. 10 seconds, Marcus whispered to himself, thinking of a farm on a distant world where he had learned that some things were worth dying for. This one's for you, old friend. The reactor core reached critical overload, and the last thing Marcus saw was a brilliant flash of light that would be visible from the sanctuary, a star born from sacrifice that would signal victory to those who had dared to believe in hope. The explosion lit up the sky like a newborn star, its brilliance visible from every corner of the sanctuary. The Guild command ship vanished in a ball of superheated plasma, taking Commander Vex and his command staff with it. The shockwave rippled outward, disabling nearby vessels and sending others tumbling through the atmosphere like broken toys. Piraxis felt the heat wash over his scales as he pulled out of his attack run, watching the destruction with a mixture of awe and grief. Marcus Chen had kept his promise, but the cost was a weight that would rest on the great dragon's heart for centuries to come. The remaining Guild forces reacted exactly as predicted. Without central coordination, their disciplined formations began to crumble. Squad leaders called frantically for orders that would never come, while ship captains made independent decisions about whether to continue the assault or retreat to safety. "All dragons, press the attack," Piraxis roared over the battlefield communication network. "Show them what happens when they threaten our children." The tide of battle turned in moments. Dragons who had been fighting defensively from concealed positions now burst from cover in coordinated assaults. Astara, despite her damaged wing, led a group of younger dragons in a devastating attack on the Guild's heavy artillery positions. Ancient Korath, his scales bearing new scars from energy weapons, cornered a full company of Guild Marines in a crystal canyon and offered them a choice: surrender or die. Most chose surrender. The space battle was even more decisive. Guild ships designed for harvesting operations rather than fleet combat found themselves facing opponents who had survived millions of years of conflict between star systems. Dragons, who had learned to fight in the void between worlds, proved more than capable of outmaneuvering human spacecraft. Within 3 hours of Marcus's sacrifice, the surviving Guild vessels were either fleeing the system or floating dead in space. The greatest harvest operation in the Guild's history had become their greatest disaster. As the smoke began to clear over the battlefield, Piraxis landed in the central courtyard of the sanctuary. Dragons gathered around him, some bearing wounds but all alive. The cost had been far less than anyone had dared hope. 3 dragons wounded, none killed, and their home intact. Astara approached carrying a small object that glowed with inner light. The memory crystal from Marcus's pendant had survived the explosion, protected by dragon fire forging techniques that could preserve delicate items even in extreme conditions. "He kept recording until the very end," she said softly. "Every moment of his infiltration, every detail of his sacrifice. The galaxy will know what a human can become when he chooses to stand with us rather than against us." Piraxis took the crystal carefully in one massive claw, feeling the weight of the memories it contained. "Summon the Council of Elders. We have decisions to make." The council convened in the great chamber where Marcus had first learned of the Guild's approach. Representatives from all the major flights attended, including several ancient dragons who rarely emerged from deep meditation. The topic before them was unprecedented: how to honor a human who had died defending dragonkind. "In our entire history, no outsider has ever been granted the honors we reserve for our fallen heroes," spoke Viridian the lawkeeper, her silver scales catching the light of ceremonial flames. "The traditions are clear. Only dragons may rest in the halls of memory." "Then perhaps it's time our traditions evolved," Astara replied firmly. "Marcus Chen died not as an outsider but as one of us. He chose our survival over his own life. That makes him dragon in all the ways that matter." The debate continued for hours, with voices both for and against breaking millennia of precedent. Some argued that honoring a human would dilute the meaning of their most sacred traditions. Others pointed out that Marcus's sacrifice had saved not just their lives but their entire culture. Finally, Korath the Starsinger spoke, his ancient voice carrying the weight of eons. "I have lived through the rise and fall of 1,000 civilizations. I have seen species emerge from primitive worlds to challenge the stars, and I have watched them crumble into dust when they lost sight of what made them worthy of greatness." He paused, allowing his words to settle before continuing. "What makes us worthy is not our scales or our fire or our ancient bloodlines. What makes us worthy is our willingness to stand for beauty, for wisdom, for the protection of the innocent. Marcus Chen embodied those virtues better than many who were born to them. The vote was close but decisive. By tradition and honor, Marcus Chen would be remembered not as a human ally, but as a dragon hero, granted full honors in the halls of memory, alongside the greatest warriors in their history. The ceremony took place at sunset, with all surviving dragons participating in the ancient ritual of remembrance. They carved Marcus's story into crystal formations that would endure for millions of years, preserving every detail of his courage and sacrifice. Artists worked through the night to create memorial sculptures that captured not just his likeness, but the spirit of his defiance against overwhelming odds. But the greatest honor came when Pyraxis announced the council's final decision. Marcus, Chen showed us that worth is not determined by birth but by choice. Therefore, we declare that from this day forward, any being who stands with us in defense of life and beauty shall be welcomed as family, regardless of their origin. The implications rippled through the assembled dragons like shockwaves. For the first time in their history, they were opening their doors to other species, creating the possibility of true alliance rather than mere coexistence. The galaxy has grown dark with greed and conquest, Pyraxis continued. Perhaps it's time for dragons to return to the stars, not as conquerors but as protectors. Marcus Chen has shown us the path. In the weeks that followed, word of the battle spread throughout the galaxy. The story of a human exile who died defending dragons captured imaginations on 1,000 worlds. Other species that had suffered under the Collectors Guild sent delegations to the sanctuary, seeking audience with the dragons who had achieved the impossible. The memory crystal containing Marcus's final battle was copied and transmitted across the galaxy, its message clear. Even the smallest individual could make a difference when they chose to stand for something greater than themselves. And in hidden sanctuaries scattered across distant worlds, young dragons who had been evacuated before the battle learned new songs that their elders taught them, songs about a warrior who had no wings but soared higher than any dragon, who had no scales but burned brighter than dragon fire, who had found his true family among the stars. 5 years after the Battle of Draconis Prime, the galaxy had begun to change in ways no one could have predicted. The dragons' decision to return to active participation in galactic affairs sent shockwaves through every major power structure. Species that had spent centuries hiding from human expansion suddenly found powerful allies willing to stand with them. The sanctuary itself had grown beyond its original borders, expanding into a sprawling complex that served as both fortress and embassy. Ships from dozens of worlds arrived daily, bringing refugees, scholars, and warriors who had heard the dragon's call to stand against those who would destroy beauty for profit. Astara stood in the newly constructed memorial hall, watching visitors from across the galaxy pay their respects to the crystal monument that bore Marcus Chen's story. The hall had become a pilgrimage site, drawing beings who sought to understand how a single act of courage could reshape the fate of worlds. Another delegation from the Andorian collective today, reported Zephyr, a young dragon who served as the sanctuary's diplomatic coordinator. They're offering a full military alliance against the remaining guild strongholds. And the council's response? Pyraxis wants to accept. He says Marcus would have approved of anyone willing to stand up to bullies regardless of their species. Astara nodded, her attention still fixed on the memorial. The crystal carving showed Marcus in his final moments, one hand on the detonation device while the other held the memory pendant. The artist had captured something in his expression that spoke of peace rather than desperation, the look of someone who had finally found his purpose. Knowledge Keeper? Zephyr's voice carried a note of excitement. There's someone here you need to meet. Astara turned to see a human woman approaching, her face bearing the weathered lines of someone who had spent years traveling between worlds. She moved with the careful precision of a veteran, and her eyes held depth that spoke of both loss and determination. My name is Sarah Chen, the woman said quietly. Marcus was my brother. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Astara felt her breath catch as she studied the woman's features, seeing familiar echoes in the set of her jaw and the directness of her gaze. I've been searching for him for 7 years, Sarah continued, ever since he disappeared after his court-martial. I followed rumors and whispers across half the galaxy before I learned what really happened here. You came to retrieve his body. Astara said gently. Sarah shook her head. I came to understand, to see what he found here that was worth dying for. She gestured toward the memorial crystal. I've watched the recordings 100 times, but I still don't understand how my brother, who spent his whole life following orders, I suddenly became someone willing to sacrifice everything for strangers. Astara extended one wing in a gesture of comfort, a dragon custom that somehow transcended species barriers. Would you like me to show you? Over the following days, Sarah experienced the sanctuary as Marcus had, not as a tourist but as a welcomed guest. She helped tend the dragon gardens, listened to ancient stories in the archive chambers, and shared meals with beings who spoke of her brother, not as a heroic legend but as a friend they still missed. He found something here that the military never gave him. Piraxis explained as they watched young dragons play in the crystal pools, purpose that came from within rather than from orders, the freedom to choose what he stood for rather than having it dictated by others. Sarah watched the dragon children, for that's what they were regardless of their size, and began to understand. He spent his whole life trying to protect people, but the system kept forcing him to make impossible choices. Here the choice was simple. Not simple, Astara corrected gently. Clear, there's a difference. Simple suggests easy, but what Marcus did required every bit of courage he possessed. On her final day at the sanctuary, Sarah stood before the memorial crystal and spoke aloud to her brother for the first time since his death. I understand now, Marcus. You didn't come here to die. You came here to finally live according to your own values. I'm proud of you, and I'm proud to be your sister. As she prepared to leave, the dragons presented her with a gift that left her speechless. A memory crystal containing not just the recordings of Marcus's final battle, but personal moments from his time at the sanctuary, conversations with Piraxis about honor and duty, quiet talks with Astara about the beauty of preserved knowledge, moments of laughter and friendship that showed him not as a tragic hero, but as someone who had found peace. Share these with the human worlds, Piraxis requested. Let them see what their exile became when he was free to choose his own path. Sarah returned to human space carrying more than memories. She carried a message from the dragons, an invitation extended to any who would stand with them in defense of the innocent and the beautiful. The response was overwhelming. Veterans like Marcus who had been cast out for inconvenient principles, scientists who valued knowledge over profit, artists who believed in beauty for its own sake. The movement that grew from Marcus's sacrifice became known as the Starfire Alliance, named for the explosion that had announced the birth of a new age. Within a decade, it had grown to encompass hundreds of worlds and dozens of species, all united by the simple principle that some things were worth protecting regardless of profit or politics. The Collectors Guild, once the most feared organization in the galaxy, found themselves hunted across every star system. Their remaining strongholds fell one by one to combined fleets of dragons, humans, and dozens of other species working in perfect coordination. But perhaps the greatest change was in how the galaxy viewed heroism itself. Marcus Chen's story became required learning in schools across hundreds of worlds, not as a tale of sacrifice, but as an example of how ordinary beings could become extraordinary through the choices they made. In the memorial hall, Astara often found herself pausing before a particular inscription carved into the crystal wall beside Marcus's monument. It was written in simple Terran, the trade language that had become common throughout the Alliance territories. Here lies Marcus Chen, human by birth, dragon by choice, hero by deed. He showed us that family is not about blood or species, but about standing together when standing matters most.
His fire burns eternal in the hearts of all who choose courage over comfort,
honor over profit, love over fear. Below that, in the flowing script of the dragon language, was a simple phrase that had become the motto of the Starfire Alliance. Worthy of the stars. And in hidden sanctuaries scattered across the galaxy, the young dragons who had been saved by Marcus's sacrifice grew to adulthood knowing that their world was part of something larger, a family that transcended species and stretched across the cosmos, bound together by the choice to protect what mattered most. The outcast warrior had found his purpose at last, and in doing so, had lit a fire that would burn for generations, proving that sometimes the greatest victories came not from conquering others, but from learning to stand together against the dark.